Thanks, John. And I just want to quickly thank the Global Carbon Capture Storage Institute and partnering with us as government on putting this event together. I think it's really valuable. And I want to thank everybody in the crowd for coming out and engaging in these discussions. I think they're very important today and moving forward. So I'm going to focus on more so the policy side. So my name's Rob Hamaliuk. I'm the Executive Director of Air and Climate Policy within the Department of Environment and Protected Areas. And we've heard a lot about the importance of CCUS to Alberta, to companies in Alberta. I'm going to focus a bit on it from an emissions perspective in terms of mainly our existing tool that we use right now in terms of carbon pricing, that being TIER, the Technology Innovation Emission Reduction Regulation, as well as the offset opportunity that could provide significant support for these activities moving forward. I also only have 15 minutes, so I apologize. It's going to be a bit high level. I'll try to hone in on what I see as the important pieces as I get through them, but definitely opportunity for further discussion as we roll through the day today. So the Technology Innovation Emission Reduction Regulation is essentially Alberta's carbon pricing approach, and many of you in the room have direct or indirect exposure to it through being regulated, through providing services to regulated facilities, through providing emission reduction opportunities through offsets to regulated facilities. So this is the third iteration of our industrial carbon pricing system since 2007. We've had, of course, the Specified Gas Emitters Regulation in 2007. In 2018, we moved to the Carbon Competitiveness Incentive Regulation. And then in 2020, we moved to the TIER system. So what I would say in terms of the evolution of this policy within Alberta, we've been working closely with our regulated and other stakeholders to ensure that every time we take a look and open this regulation, we consider, of course, the context of the day, which is ever changing, but also the input from our stakeholders as you guys are living this on the ground. You're dealing with the regulation. You're looking to capitalize on opportunities through signals that we're sending through this policy. So we work closely with stakeholders to try to improve this regulation, this policy every time we open it up. So again, it's industrial-based policy focused on large emitters that are greater than 100,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. There are a few opportunities to come into the regulation if you aren't above that threshold. Some are, on the maybe on the renewable electricity, for example, in ability to opt into the regulation and generate recognition through credits. Also, our conventional oil and gas sector, we enabled strategically an opportunity to opt in to the regulation, and by doing that, you're probably wondering why. You would want to opt into a regulation to get a compliance obligation, but really it was to opt out and avoid the federal fuel charge, which would be charged at 100% of the emissions as opposed to TIER, which starts out at 10% of your emissions. So there's a bit of a savings and a competitiveness perspective there. Not going to spend too much time here, but we are, all of you know, Alberta is an industrial-based economy. Our emissions profile is unique. When looking at other jurisdictions, other provinces within Canada, most of our emissions are coming from the supply side of the economy. As you see here, oil and gas, electricity, oil sands, major components of our emissions profile. We're unique from that perspective, as other jurisdictions would maybe be more demand side focused in terms of transportation or buildings. So what that means from a policy perspective in Alberta is that we need to be able to tailor our policy within Alberta for Alberta to ultimately get the best results in terms of emission reductions at the lowest cost possible. So now before I jump to the next slide, I'll just set the frame for where we are today. So our deputy mentioned that we have some significant changes, and I think Candace and other panel members mentioned we have some significant changes with the TIER system starting in 2023. So some of those changes are to enhance the regulation to ensure we're meeting our goals in terms of emission reductions moving forward. So in a nutshell, I'll spend a very little amount of time on the changes, but we have changed the price schedule of the TIER fund. So just a bit of context there. To comply with the tier regulation, you can either pay into the fund, which this is the tier fund, and this is the rate you'll be paying by year. You can purchase and use emission performance credits, and sorry for being a bit jargony, but those are reductions at a regulated facility. Or you can buy Alberta emission offset credits, which are reductions outside of the regulatory facility. And we'll get into a bit of that. But in terms of the tier fund payment option, we produced a schedule of the tier fund price out to 2030 for a couple reasons. One reason, we were in discussions, of course, with the federal government as they were looking at their output-based pricing system, their benchmark assessment under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. So this was one of the requirements for tier to remain in Alberta as opposed to the federal system coming in. But from an investment and support perspective, I think where this is critical is it provides certainty to some of these investors, projects looking to plan out into the future in terms of what could the revenue and support look like moving forward. It was important for us to establish a schedule, not just on an annual basis, or each year we update the carbon price, but a forward-looking schedule that gives a bit of certainty moving out into the future. So that was one of the big changes. The other big change was on the stringency of the regulation itself. So what we've done there is we've moved from a tightening rate before of 1% per annum to a tightening rate of 2% per annum. And when I say tightening rate, I mean increasing the stringency on the benchmarks. So basically, put in layman's terms, it's the emission reduction targets or the requirements for a facility in any given year. And just to get maybe just a bit further on benchmarks, we have basically two ways we set the benchmarks within our system. We have an ability to do a facility-specific benchmark that looks at a historic period and gives you a % reduction off that benchmark, and what we call a high-performance benchmark. So in this chart here, the facility-specific benchmarks are really the thick black marks on each of the bars representing facilities, and the line across is the high-performance benchmark, which is typically set near the high-performing facility or facilities in that particular sector producing that particular product. So the reason we introduced the high-performance benchmark was really to recognize investment of state-of-the-art technology, new facilities, so that those new facilities, new technology wouldn't be on the hook to reduce from that already high-performing threshold. So just looking here, basically, if you see facility, this is just to describe the system. Facility 1 and facility 2 would be subject to the high performance benchmark, because the way the system works is the facilities are subject to the least stringent of them. So they would get the high performance benchmark. So facility 1, it looks like it will be facing no compliance obligation by this depiction. Facility 2 would be facing a slight compliance obligation, but less than the compliance obligation they'd be facing with a facility-specific benchmark. And the other facilities 3 to 5 would be using the facility-specific. I know that's getting a bit technical, but one of the other changes that we made, we had a credit limit. So a limit to the amount of credit that you can use for compliance purposes. That includes EPCs, emissions performance credits, and offsets. We increased that limit from 60%, rising up to 90% by 2026. We thought, this is very important to be able to increase the demand for some of these much needed investments in emission reduction technology. Also, at the same time, providing lower cost reduction opportunities to our facilities. So at a high level, this is our carbon market. I know many of you live and breathe this on a daily basis, but this is a depiction of essentially how the market works in terms of satisfying compliance obligations or generating credits. So 2 facility examples here. Emitter A is in a compliance obligation situation with that green amount. So they can comply either paying into the fund at the rate with the schedule that I just showed you. They can comply by going to the market, purchasing EPCs from other regulated facilities that have reduced their emissions. They can purchase offsets from projects that are outside of the regulation. So we have a wind turbine here, but probably more pertinent for the discussion today would be a CCUS or a CCS or a EOR type project that's being able to supply credits to the market. The other facility is in a crediting position, so they're beating their benchmark, they're beating their facility target from whatever initiative they put together on site. So they're able to monetize those credits, and again in the form of EPCs, and sell those to the market. So just from a kind of a market dynamics perspective, from a policymaker, and John, from a regulator, it's important for us to ensure the market is healthy in terms of the policy is driving emission reductions and creating the incentive needed to drive those reductions over time. So we're always looking at the demand for credit in the system and the associated supply of credit. So to make sure that that balance is healthy and we're maintaining as much as possible the marginal price on emissions. And from an investor, from a project developer perspective, you can imagine why that's important to ensure those pieces are in place so that the value for your project and for some of these credits that are being generated for your project are enduring into the future and are aligning with expectations from the time that the investment occurred. So just a bit on the emission offset system. A lot of you have quite a bit of experience, but it is a compliance market and it is a very rigorous regulatory system. And it is the first, definitely the first in Canada, one of the first in North America, I believe the first compliance market in North America. A lot of our protocols, recipes as they referred to previous, are adopted in other jurisdictions. To develop one, it is a rigorous development process, multi-stakeholder. That is important to ensure that the credibility is there, again, from an investor, from a project perspective, to maintain that value of that credit moving forward and into the future. So it is quite an involved process, but for the discussions today, we have two protocols in place. Of course, the CCS protocol and the Enhanced Oil Recovery Protocol, which went through, with many of you in the room, a very, very rigorous, lengthy and important process to ensure we get it right. So we have, I would say, growing comfort, growing sophistication within the offset system since it was put into place in 2007. From a policy perspective, we are growing and seeing the policy and regulation being implemented. I believe from a company and a offset project proponent perspective and service provider perspective, you guys are growing in the sophistication as well, and we're learning on a daily basis from our stakeholders and from our regulated community and ecosystem. So I think that's a key to success as we move forward, is to continue that collaboration and be agile and nimble as some of these changes occur, to really maintain the outcome that we're trying to achieve in terms of emission reductions, policy certainty into the future. So I think, I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I might speed it up a bit here, but this is just a bit of results from our system since 2007. Over 200 megatons of compliance obligation to date, 78 megatons of offset credits created, a large amount of money paid into the tier fund, which you'll hear ERA in a moment talk about how some of that money is being used and invested in technology that'll ultimately, again, get us to our goal of emission reductions at a low cost to the economy into the future. And this policy has been integral in some key success stories in Alberta. One of them is the transition from emissions from coal-fired electricity, which we're expecting to come offline this year, which is 7 years ahead of schedule in terms of the 2030 target. So I think that's a big win. It's not entirely from carbon pricing, but carbon pricing had a big piece to play in that. Okay, so now moving on and focusing specifically on CCUS with respect to tier, with respect to the offset system. One of the significant changes that I didn't mention was creation of a new class of credit in our system, a new called the sequestration credit, and also a capture recognition ton. I'll get into a bit of detail in a bit in terms of exactly why we did that and how those work. But right now, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the two opportunities in terms of the CCS protocol and the emission offset, or enhanced oil recovery protocol. Sorry. So there's two types of crediting that can occur here. It's probably going to be the latter, but there is an opportunity to get credits directly within your regulated facility if the tonnage is injected within the regulatory bounds. And that would be immediately classified as an emission performance credit, go into your compliance calculation accordingly. The more common and probable approach that we have set up is that the injection activity happens outside of the regulatory bounds in terms of tier, and that would then be initiated through the offset system as an offset credit. And that's how we have the system set up today. And through couple great projects I think we have a total of around 10 megatons of tonnage sequestered to date from CCS and EOR activities within the offset system. You've heard today that's probably going to be hopefully growing significantly as we move forward with some of these projects and activity. So basically we have two protocols. I'm not going to spend too much time, but of course the name implies what they're for. Carbon capture and storage is for deep saline sequestration. Enhanced oil recovery is more for the utilization and of that in EOR schemes. Quickly, this might be a bit trivial and I'm oversimplifying it, but the CCS protocol, really the way the crediting works is you take your injected CO2, you net off the project emissions. So the project emissions are the emissions associated with transporting, compressing, injecting that CO2 downhole. And then the resulting net is the amount of credits that you would get. So that's essentially the additional CO2 that you've sequestered from that project taking place. And that's oversimplifying because there's a host, and you'll hear this in the regulatory section. You've heard it a bit before around MMV requirements and details. There's a number of controls, assurances in place around this, again, to ensure the reductions are ironclad, credible, maintain their value now and well into the future. EOR protocol is a bit more complex because it's into an active formation. We take the injected CO2, again, like CCS, we discount the project emissions, but we also apply a discount factor, recognizing that there may be some CO2 that's coming back up to the surface, and that's based on rigorous scientific evidence and operational history of these and informed and existing within the protocol and that rigorous protocol process. There's also a holdback associated with it, which aligns with some of the requirements that our energy regulator has once the injection activity is done, and it's all around, what are the requirements around pressurization of that particular well, and then what could conceivably happen to the CO2 as a result. So I'm probably close to time, but I want to spend a little bit of time on the CCUS credit, the new credit class. So why on earth would we create a new credit class? It seems overly complicated. We heard from stakeholders, working with stakeholders, as I mentioned, throughout this process. And as companies are more and more interested in CCUS, we want to ensure that we're able to provide as much flexibility to some of our operators as possible. So we decided to create a new class of credit called the sequestration credit and the capture recognition ton. So the driver is a bit on the flexibility. The driver is also a significant piece is the ability to stack and gain credit and recognition under the Clean Fuels Regulation, the federal Clean Fuels Regulation. So taking this approach, that sequestration credit and the capture recognition ton would be able to receive credit and recognition under the Clean Fuel Regulation, whereas the offset as it existed through our discussions with Environment Climate Change Canada would not be able to receive that recognition. So how do you create a capture or a sequestration credit and a capture recognition ton? It's the same process that you would use to create an emission offset up until after the point the emission offset is created, serialized. Once it's serialized on the registry, you would then put a request in to convert those serialized tons to sequestration credits. So that would happen on the registry. They'd be converted. Sequestration credits, for all intents and purposes, behave the exact same as emission offsets. I can't stress that enough. So they behave exactly as emission offsets. So you can trade them, you can bank them. They're subject to the credit limit. It's the same functionally as an emission offset. The unique aspect of the sequestration credit is, of course, the recognition under the CFR, but the ability to move it back to the site that captured that CO2. And that site may choose to convert it into our second class, which is a capture recognition ton. So this capture recognition ton was really conceived by what we heard from stakeholders as a requirement to be able to account for that ton on site in the year that capture and sequestration has happened and reflect that in their regulatory compliance obligation. So creating this capture recognition ton, we were able to do that in that it's deducted from their total regulated emissions. And if they are able to beat their facility limit, which quite often would be the case in high volume projects, they will be able to generate emission performance credits on that activity. So it's really only for use at that facility that captured that CO2. The capture recognition ton is different from an emission offset and a sequestration credit in that it cannot be banked, cannot be traded, has to be used in the year that it was captured and sequestered. So there is a difference there, but it also gets credit recognition as we understand it under the clean fuel regulation. There was also a bit of a desire from an ESG perspective, as I understand it, from companies to be able to have this incorporated in their regulatory calculations and their reporting out in the year that it occurred as a reduction that happened at the facility and supported by the regulatory calculations. So this slide is basically saying exactly what I just said. Nothing new. I will leave this one up for a bit though, and this is really the difference between the types of credits. So as you can see, the emission offset or the carbon offset is functionally the exact same as the sequestration credit. The only issue is the offset isn't stackable as we understand it with the clean fuel regulation, which is why one of the reasons we created it. The capture recognition ton has a few more restrictions in that it can't be banked or sold on, but it does receive recognition under the CFR as we understand it, federal policy, and it's able to adjust the regulatory emissions on site, thereby potentially being a spot to generate credits. I want to stress that we are not creating additional credits here. It's an additional credit class, so there'll still be the same amount of credit from the activity. We're just providing some flexibility in terms of how proponents can use that credit and how that credit exists within the ecosystem, which we've heard from stakeholders as a desire. So with that, I don't know how I did for time, but that's it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so next I'm going to call on Grace Meikle with the Emissions Reduction Alberta to give us a little bit of an overview of some of the great work that they've been doing on CCUS.
Thanks, John, and thanks for the opportunity to come speak today, and as well as to everybody for being here, and also the Global Institute for hosting this event. All right, so I'm going to speak to basically what that tier fund goes to. Part of that is allocated to Emissions Reduction Alberta, and our mandate is to reduce emissions in the province. So very simple. So I'm going to speak to kind of some of the funding specific to CCUS. But I did want to mention before I started, one of our trusted partners we work very closely with is Alberta Innovates. And last year they published the CCUS white paper, which basically provides a really good overview of all the CCUS technologies that the province has funded over the past couple of decades. And it's available online. So that's a really good overview if you're interested in that. And it details through the gaps of where each technology is at through capture, utilization, and storage. So just a quick bit about Emissions Reduction Alberta. So we have existed since 2009. To date, we have invested almost $900 million, so a lot of money. We have really good leveraging. So the total value of all our projects we funded, there's over 200 projects, over $7 billion. And what's interesting is actually almost 200 million of that has gone towards CCUS, so quite a significant portion. But we are sector agnostic. We fund basically anything that reduces emissions. We issue funding calls 1 to 2 times per year. They're usually very conceptual in nature. Our most recent call was industrial transformation. Before that, we launched a circular economy call. So we have a huge diversity of projects that you can all look at on our website. So like I mentioned, I'm going to go through some of the funding that we've done over the past 12 years. It's specific to CCUS. We're probably not going to hear as much about carbon utilization and conversion today, apart from EOR, but actually Alberta has a very proud history in this topic. So from 2017 to 2019, ERA launched a carbon utilization grand challenge. So this basically reached innovators around the world, brought innovators to Alberta in carbon utilization technologies. We were open to any technology that used the carbon, did not include EOR. It was a total, basically, we were starting with very low technology readiness technologies, but the goal was to scale up to technologies that had a market of over a megaton of utilized emissions per year. It was very successful. And subsequent to that, COSIA Energy hosted the X Prize in Alberta, and those technologies were demonstrated at what's called the Alberta Carbon Conversion Technology Center. And that's a picture of it here. That's located outside the Shepherd Energy Center owned by ENMAX. So basically they take a slipstream of that natural gas facility and they compress it and they are able to test out their technologies. And so that's really cool that we have that here in Alberta. And I'll just give a couple of examples of technologies that have come out of our funding in carbon conversion. So one of really exciting project in Alberta is called the Genesee Carbon Conversion Center. The project lead is Capital Power Utility, and Genesee plant is a coal converted to natural gas plant in Edmonton. And they've partnered with a company called Carbon Corp, which owns a technology called C2CNT. And they're going to actually take flue gas from one of their units and directly convert it to carbon nanotubes. And that'll be a totally new product in Alberta, opening up new markets. That facility is going to be operational in the next couple of years and is going to initially produce 2,500 tons per year, but we'll have the ability to scale up. And then another one I wanted to highlight is carbon upcycling. That was a technology that really was born and bred in Alberta and came out of the Grand Challenge. And what they do is they absorb CO2 to nanoparticles, particularly fly ash, which is a major ingredient in concrete. And it says they scaled up to 7 tons per day, but actually it's 20 tons per day. And at the ACCTC that I mentioned in the previous slide. And they've also established commercial partnerships with major players, including Lafarge. And both of these technologies are looking at basically, not only do they capture CO2 and use it, but they also have the more significant opportunities actually in the downstream reductions because they're going to displace cement, which is a more carbon intensive product to make. In Alberta, we hear a lot about obviously EOR and also sequestration because of our good geology, but we do have some really exciting projects here, and they can be particularly valuable outside of Alberta or places where they don't have the same geology. So wanted to highlight those. In terms of international partnerships, the ACT consortium is European-led, and it's basically, it's a number of different countries are participating in this. Every project in this funding, they issue annual funding calls. They completed their 4th one most recently. Every project has to partner with one or more international partners, so it's really forcing international collaborations in CCUS. ERA is the only subnational member, and we've funded a number of exciting projects through ACT as well. And then most recently, and maybe most pertinent to this meeting, is our carbon capture kickstart program. So this was a bit of a different call for ERA, or a different funding program, I should say. About a year ago, we announced funding for 11 carbon capture feed studies. So these are front-end engineering design studies for large industrial emitters in Alberta. And it was 11 studies, but it's actually 20 to 30 facilities all in total, because that includes the Pathways Initiative. So all told, it's a number of point sources. Collectively, if those facilities do go forward with carbon capture, they'll account for 10% of Alberta's industrial emissions. So it's quite a significant effort. And these feed studies, I guess there's a couple things that are exciting to mention here. So they span the gambit of different industries. Almost all the projects are looking to reach final investment decision within the next couple of years and become operational by 2030, just to take advantage of that investment tax credit. So they are moving very quickly. And then we really want to make sure that these studies are valuable beyond just the particular facilities they concern. So they have a huge knowledge sharing component. And also for that reason, ERA has partnered with the International CCS Knowledge Center to maximize the benefits of those studies and also make sure that they incorporate lessons learned from existing existing projects like Boundary Dam. So there's going to be a lot of really exciting things that come out of these FEED studies over the next couple of years. And this is just a map showing you kind of the gambit of different industries that those FEED studies represent and geographically across Alberta. And then just lastly, I wanted to talk about next generation capture technologies. Most, but not all of the FEED studies are looking at amine-based capture technologies, but not all of them. Actually, one of them, Suncor Refinery, is looking at using Savante's solid sorbent technology, and that's also a capture technology that's born and bred here in Alberta. ERA has funded them. They've received funding from ERA. They are scaling up. They've got actually a couple of FEED studies going on in the US. So they've been highly successful and are very near commercial. They're basically they have operating pilots, so they're commercially ready, and they're worth mentioning because it's just a really exciting kind of additional technology that you may not have heard of. And I think we will be hearing from them later today on one of the panels. And then lastly, molten carbonate fuel cells is another lower technology readiness for sure, but is another technology that's been funded by the province that's pertinent to oil sands that we have identified as promising. And just the last thing I will mention, this slide, obviously there's not a lot on it, but in terms of upcoming funding opportunities. So we just funded a carbon capture specific call. And like I mentioned, we run the gambit of in terms of what we fund, but CCUS is super important to the province and to ERA. So we don't have a specific funding call coming up for CCUS, but we are looking at specific funding calls for hydrogen in partnership with the Alberta Innovates Hydrogen Center of Excellence. That's tangential to CCUS. And then we are looking really hard about how we can scale up basically advanced carbon capture technologies. So we've got, a couple of, we got amine based technologies and some that are maybe really close, but then kind of how to fill in that gap of from 2030 and beyond of alternatives. And so we're looking at that as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. We're also very pleased to be joined with some of our colleagues from the federal government. We've got a couple of folks in the room. We've got a couple of folks online. We're going to try through the miracles of the internet to connect with some of the folks that are joining us online. Before you start typing your questions into Slido, these are not the folks that are in charge of the ITC or the contracts for differences. So let them maybe deliver their presentations before you compose your questions. I'd like to introduce Mary Khounphet with the Clean Growth Hub. Can you hear me okay, Mary?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you again for inviting us. Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Khounphet, and I am a senior officer at the Clean Growth Hub. Thank you for joining us today for an overview of the hub. The Clean Growth Hub launched in 2018 as the federal focal point for clean technology. We act as the Government of Canada's coordinating center for federal clean tech activities and basically a one-stop shop for information about funding and services for clean tech initiatives. Our mandate is to help clean tech innovators and adopters navigate the ecosystem and federal programs. Now, the hub is unique in government because it is led by two departments, Natural Resources Canada, NRCan, and Innovation and Science Economic Development Canada, ISED. We are a whole of government initiative that brings together many different departments, federal departments and agencies that support clean tech development and deployment. We have an interdepartmental team made up of representatives from our 17 federal partners. Now, many areas of government touch on clean tech, and the relationships with our partners help us provide up-to-date, tailored information to our clients. Each department and agency has a designated hub representative providing access to knowledge of programs, policies, and networks for their organizations. We also work beyond these partners to offer the most comprehensive client service experience. Even if a department is not part of the hub, we will reach out to them for relevant program information and advice for our client. Next slide, please. Now, the most common reason why companies and organizations come to us is for help in navigating through the federal funding ecosystem to find support for their clean tech project. As you know, with federal programs, there are some that have continuous intake and are open all the time for applications. There are also some that are open for a short period of time for a very short window of application. That is basically where we come to play and why it's beneficial for you to work with the Hub. Through the Hub, you can stay abreast of these programs and everything that you would need to know for your project. We can help you identify the most appropriate opportunities for your project, such as federal grants and contribution programs, wage subsidies, and tax incentives. We can help you understand these programs and the different terms associated with them as well. Now, companies and organizations that would most benefit from our services are those that have a project that is program ready. There is a toolkit on our website that will guide you in applying for government funding and can help you identify if you are program ready. Now, what program ready means is that you have a specific clean tech project, have a partial funding gap that you need to fill, and need help navigating through federal funding programs or other services like lab supports or regulatory information. The project should also be past the initial fundamental research phase as well. Essentially, what program ready means is that if a program were to open, you're ready to submit an application. You have a business plan, you know what you need to do, you have some partners, and you need some federal support to identify opportunities. Next slide, please. So if you are looking to connect with us, there is a service request form that we have on our website under the advisory services page. It's not an application, so you won't get rejected. It gives us baseline information to help us understand what you need for us to support your project. For example, if you're looking for information on tax incentives, it gives us this knowledge so that we can better prepare to provide you with the right guidance and advice. The form is for new clients. So if you have been a Clean Growth Hub client in the past, you can reach out to us at any time for continual support, either on a project we had previously discussed or any new initiatives that you may have on the go. For those who are new, this form gives us a little bit of information about your organization's clean tech goals, a brief description of your project, information on the technology, total project costs, and so on. Once we receive this form, we go through it with our team and bring together recommendations to help support you. So when you do connect with the Clean Growth Hub, you're a Hub client for life. As a benefit to this relationship, we try to make sure that you stay connected with all the different programs that are relevant for your needs as they come up. Next slide, please. So to conclude, just want to mention a few other ways that we can support you. Our website provides online resources to help you find and access federal funding and other government support. We maintain a list of clean tech specific federal funding there, which can save you time from searching through multiple program websites. We also try to post information about industry programs supported financially by the federal government. And the website features resources and tools for clean tech companies, such as the toolkit on applying for federal grant and contribution funding programs, and our technology readiness level, or TRL, assessment tool. And our website is updated on a weekly basis to highlight Government of Canada news, funding and procurement opportunities, public consultations, event announcements, successes experienced by our clients, and so on. Other content also includes announcements and updates from our federal partners. Now, in addition to our website, we issue a newsletter quarterly to keep subscribers up to date on clean tech programs and news in the federal context. The next issue will be published at the end of this month. So if you haven't done so already, we recommend signing up for our newsletter, as it gives timely information on opportunities that you may be interested in. So that's it for me. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about the Clean Growth Hub, our services, and how to connect with us. Look forward to answering any questions you may have during the discussion period. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. Hopefully we also have Graham Allen with the Office of Energy Research and Development also joining us remotely. Graham, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, almost afternoon for you folks. It's a real pleasure to join you in today's session. So my name is Graham Allen. I'm the manager of investments and partnerships in the Office of Energy Research and Development at Natural Resources Canada. My team manages the Energy Innovation Program, which is our flagship grants and contributions program. So I will talk to you a bit about the program today, and then I'll talk more specifically to one of our current CCUS related funding opportunities that may be of interest to some folks in the room. So if we could just maybe move ahead through to slide 3. Perfect. Thank you. So I'll start off just a quick overview of the Energy Innovation Program. As I mentioned, it's our flagship grants and contributions program. The Office of Energy R&D has a long history of delivering energy innovation programming. Some of you may have heard of the Clean Growth Program, Breakthrough Energy Solutions Canada, Impact Canada Challenges. We've run a number of these programs through the Office of Energy R&D in the past. We cover a lot of technology areas, anywhere from industrial decarbonization priorities to smart grid renewable energy, transport-related decarbonization, buildings-related. We also have the flexibility to support a range of organization types. So we support companies, small, medium, and large, not-for-profits, academic organizations, municipalities, utilities, etc. Generally, our support spans from around TRL 2-3, right up to supporting front-end engineering and design work on first-of-a-kind commercial demonstration projects. We provide funding for projects, but in addition to that, the office provides a range of non-funding support to help proponents grow their solutions and can help navigate some of the conversations going on linked to the development of code, standards, and regulations. So we provide some support in addition to just funding projects in that regard. And we work closely with a network of what we call trusted partners across the country to coordinate regionally nuanced support and amplify the impact of our funding. So it was great to hear Grace present earlier, and Emissions Reduction Alberta and Alberta Innovates are among some of our closest partners in that group. So really great to be on the line with you. So if we could shift to the next, actually, I'll just say really quickly is that in terms of our carbon capture utilization and storage specific funding, we have a kind of a special stream of funds for that was announced in the federal budget in 2021. So there was $319 million that is going to advance research, development, and demonstration activities in CCUS. We initially launched a call that focused on feeds for large-scale novel CCUS projects. We worked closely with ERA and their Kickstarter program on that, and are jointly funding a few projects through that. We've now moved on and are funding some earlier stage priorities, and you can see them broken down here. So we launched an $81.5 million CCUS research, development, and demonstration call that has 3 focus areas. And so we earlier this year launched and then closed the focus area that is supporting capture related solutions. In late January of this year, we opened the latest focus area that's going to focus on storage and transportation related priorities. And you can see here that has a deadline for expressions of interest that's coming up. We will then wrap things up later this year with an anticipated intake focusing on utilization technologies. Next slide, please. So for our storage and transportation focus area, this is really a response to what we see across the country as key barriers in advancing CCUS projects linked to the need to develop a better understanding of storage capacity across the country. And so we are aiming at covering a bunch of different activity in this space. So it's the development of sites. It is the development of technologies that can support advancement of future sites. And then it's also an area that we refer to as our related scientific activity. And so that can support some of the foundational knowledge required to set us up for success in the future. So things like subsurface behavior of CO2 in various conditions that will enable a bunch of different project development in the future. Next slide, please. So this is just building on the point I just made. We're covering research and development as well as demonstration activities, both on direct site development, on the development of technology solutions that can support a bunch of different sites being developed and some of that foundational knowledge. Here you see within that context, there are some priorities that we will be paying special attention to. So things like the development of transport and storage hubs, exploration of storage opportunities in regions that are not currently well characterized or near industrial areas that don't currently have capacity developed or available. So those are important kind of narratives to tease out in applications, as well as knowledge generation that can advance the development of regulations, codes, and standards going forward in this space. Next slide. Ineligible projects you can see listed here. We are not going to broadly, we're not covering projects that have components that are not deemed to be innovative, that's replicating existing facilities in operation. Projects involved in enhanced oil recovery and projects that are advancing the development of technologies or techniques that are linked to non-permanent storage. Next slide, please. So the application process, as I mentioned, the expression of interest deadline is coming up on April 17th at midnight Eastern time. And from there, we will evaluate that initial batch of expressions of interest. And we will invite a subset of those folks to submit full project proposals. That process will run into summer, fall 2023. And then we will go through an evaluation and selection process from there. You can expect that notification of projects that are selected for funding will come in fall, winter 2023. And then final due diligence will be conducted and negotiation of contribution agreements and kind of initiation of those projects. Next slide. So the funding and support that's available, I mentioned these kind of three categories of activity. So research and development, demonstration, and related scientific activities. For RSA and R&D based activities, we're offering up to 75% of project costs with a minimum contribution of $500,000 and a maximum of $5 million. In the demonstration kind of stream of activity, we'll support up to 50% of project costs. Minimum funding is $1 million. There's a bit of a nuance to projects that focus on transportation priorities will be eligible for a maximum funding of $5 million. Storage focused projects will be eligible to a maximum funding of $10 million. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up here, if you are interested in submitting an expression of interest, just a couple of kind of tips to consider. Really make sure that you read the applicant's guide carefully. That's available on the website for the Office of Energy R&D. And just ensure alignment in how you're proposing your project with the eligibility criteria that's outlined in the guide, as well as the evaluation criteria that is outlined in Appendix B of the guide. Paying close attention to completing sections on the intake form that are tagged as mandatory avoids any mistakes that can lead to your proposal being screened out unnecessarily. So would just flag that. And also where proposals involve partners, we recommend that you just really clearly outline the nature of those partnerships and their current status, recognizing that sometimes that evolves a little bit between expression of interest and full project proposal. Where possible, the inclusion of letters of support can really go to strengthen the quality of the application. And the last thing that I mentioned here is we're hosting a web session for the call tomorrow, where we'll go into a bit more detail, delve into some of the elements of the applicant's guide. You can find the link to register for that session on the Office of Energy R&D website. It kicks off at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. and will run for about an hour. So if folks have any follow-up questions, that's going to be a great opportunity to dig in a little bit more on the call. Next slide, please. So in addition to that webinar, any questions that you have, particularly project-specific questions around eligibility, things like that, would really advise that you use this email. It's a lot to copy down in a room there. So you can also, the email is included on the Office of Energy R&D website. It shouldn't be too hard to find. Yeah, we really look forward to hearing from folks that are interested in participating. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Okay. And I'd now like to introduce Perry Eddy with the Strategic Innovation Fund, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of that program.
Thank you for having me here. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be anywhere. Rodney Dangerfield made that popular, but I think after COVID, we can all appreciate it. So let me tell you a little bit about SIF. SIF is the Strategic Innovation Fund. And the word innovation is often misunderstood when people are looking at the Strategic Innovation Fund. So what we're really seeking is disruptive innovation. So a change that can permanently impact how a process operates, or a radical innovation that creates an entirely new way of doing things. And SIF has interest in projects that provide new innovation and less interest in projects that just merely adopt existing technologies. On this slide, the arrow at the top shows where SIF fits into the overall funding ecosystem. You can see on the left, you have some of the programs that fund between the $1 and $10 million mark. SIF has a minimum ask of $10 million. And so that also ties into the fact that we have a minimum eligible cost for projects of about $20 million. Excuse me. Federal contributions can cover 10 to 50%, although SIF has preference to stay between the 10 and 30% range. And a lot of people are asking me about stacking. So stacking of any form, so whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, there's a 75% limit on stacking of funds. So in the box here that says supporting Canadian innovation ecosystem, that's talking about our 5 streams of the SIF program, which I'll get into in a few minutes. Securing benefits. So a big part of what we do is try to secure benefits. And when we look at applications that come into SIF, we compare it against a bunch of criteria for benefits to Canadians. And I'll also speak to that a little bit more. Long-term agreements. And this is important because there has been in the past some misunderstanding of what SIF is. A lot of people think SIF is a grant program. SIF is actually not. For the most part, it's a repayable program. So applicants to SIF will go into an agreement for anywhere from 10 to 25 years, where a repayment program will be in place for the most part. There are some exceptions to that rule, but just go into it understanding that the majority of SIF funding is repayable. Now, people ask me, so what is the interest rate? There is no interest rate. It's an interest-free loan for all intents and purposes, but it would be over a 10 to 25 year period. Okay, so this is the slide I was talking about with respect to the different areas. So we have 5 streams, and they're broken up into 2 areas. So we have the business innovation and growth area, and those are predominantly for-profit organizations incorporated in Canada, small, medium, or large. Stream 1 supports R&D development. So accelerate the commercialization or creation of new IP. Stream 2 is about facilitating scale up. So getting a project from concept to either a field test or actual commercialization. Stream 3 is related to where we work with foreign companies for foreign direct investment attraction. And then we have the second category, which is collaborations and networks, and that's Stream 4 and 5. So Stream 4 is grand challenges. So tackling grand challenges. So some of the Stream 4 activities that we've had recently is what we call the high emitters call to action. And that ended, we closed that in June. And some of you may have heard that there were quite a few Western Canadian projects selected for that. Majority of them were in the CCUS space. And then there's Stream 5, which is about building national networks to support industries. Okay. So when I spoke earlier about benefits, these are the areas that we really look at. So when we're talking about 3 types of benefits, economic benefits, we're looking at high-skilled jobs, creating significant FDI, contribution to GDP, and spillover or spin-off potential. And then there's innovation benefits. We want to see commercialization of IP. We want to see development of new IP, and we want to see R&D investments in Canada. And then the public benefits, technology transfer, collaboration with academia for internships and co-ops, positive environmental impact, specifically related to greenhouse gas emissions, and promotion of diversity and inclusion. So we require that, it's not a requirement, but we recommend that companies have inclusion and equity programs in place, and that there's documentation that it will be a continuing process. And this one speaks back to the fact that it's a long-term program designed to attract and select high-performing applicants. We want to make sure that the company has some financial acumen there and backing, and actually have the funding to be able to do what they need to do. So we want to make sure that they're going to be around in quite some time. And when I say have the funding to do what they need to do, SIF is a contribution-based program. So a company needs to have the money to spend in the first place so that they can submit to SIF and then receive reimbursement. So if the company doesn't have the funding in the first place, that's considered to be not a good thing. Some of the other things we want to see is management capability. We want to see the ability to administer the project and to operate the facility after the project is completed, financial capacity, able to support front-end procurement, and growth trajectory, whether there was entry into new markets, new products, or market penetration. This is the SIF process. Where I work is actually far to the left. I'm in the pre-SOI consultation area, but essentially the real process starts at the statement of interest. And so some of the things that are highlighted here is acknowledgement of receipt within 24 hours of submission. So we let you know that we received it, and then we do an outreach call within 15 days of submission. And then the application will go into analysis. And the analysis will normally take 80 days. That's our goal. Once that's completed, then there's a full application submission. And that's where we ask for, in deep detail, what the project is supposed to be covering. This is the due diligence and confirmation of results. This is where we start working with companies to identify what kind of a contribution agreement will be built. And once all that has been bypassed, then the application will go for ministerial approval. And then they go to finalizing a contract and then announcements. People ask how long this will take. We say roughly a year, but there are some mitigating factors, and one of them being if you see full application analysis and due diligence, that's where the company has to go away and start developing their full application. Some people may take 6 months to do that. If that's the case, and that spreads out the process quite a bit. So we say a year, and we want to work as fast as business can operate, but it depends on the back and forth and the communication between two parties. So this is probably one of the portions that you'd be most interested in, which is the Net Zero Accelerator. It's an $8 billion fund, and it's separated into 3 areas. So we have the decarbonization of high emitting sectors. We have the green industrial transformation and the clean tech development and battery ecosystem. So the first portion, decarbonization of high emitting sectors, supports the 2030 emissions reductions targets for Canada. We have a lot of cooperation in this area with the industrial decarbonization team, which you'll hear from, and it closely aligns with our efforts in the recent high emitters call to action. Green Industrial Transformations Project helps sectors move away from greenhouse gas intensive activities and helps to research, develop, and adopt new processes and products. And then, of course, the investments in clean tech development and battery ecosystems supports technologies to disrupt the sector from greenhouse gas perspective and prioritize investments in emerging clean tech spaces. The high emitter call to action had 2 strategic investment paths. The high emitting sectors, that was specifically related to significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, to deploy greenhouse gas reduction technology that is nearly commercially ready. So in TRL 8 or 9, and it's led by a company seeking to reach net zero. The transformational ideas pathway, and we've had active engagement with the industrial decarbonization team on this. Again, significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, multilateral funding, so co-funding opportunities with other organizations, and it may require a consortium of parties to achieve emissions reductions. So this would be something that would be much grander in scale. So I'm going to skip that last slide, but largely what it was talking about was SIF has several projects under consideration in Western Canada. We have about 5 in Saskatchewan, and I think there are about 7 in Alberta right now. And those projects contribute to a total of about 9.6 megatons per year being captured and stored. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Perry. Next up, we've got Andrew Goddard with the Industrial Decarbonization team.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Goddard. I'm with the Federal Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. As Perry noted, I work very closely with his team within SIF, as well as Mary's team, the Clean Growth Hub, and Graham Allen's team within Natural Resources Canada. I'm very pleased to be here today and introduce you to the Industrial Decarbonization team. The Industrial Decarbonization team is a relatively young team. We're only about just over a year old. We're based within the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development department, but we've developed an interdepartmental approach. This is very important so that we can leverage expertise from Environment Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, and other partners. The EDT is committed to facilitating and supporting large-scale industrial decarbonization projects, specifically in addressing financing gaps and focusing specifically on transformative projects, as Perry noted a little bit in his slides. The focus really is on facilitating Canada's emissions reduction targets for 2030 and 2050. In doing so, we're seeking projects specifically that have the potential to significantly contribute to these emissions reduction targets, are technologically more mature or advanced. Here in the slides, I've noted TRL 7 to 9. Projects that aim to reduce domestic GHG reductions or aim to achieve domestic GHG reductions, as opposed to production of clean fuels, for example, for export. And are lastly very large in scale, as I mentioned, and bring together multiple players and partners in order to target larger and larger industrial decarbonization objectives. Our approach works closely with companies to position their projects from early concept alongside partners and federal government financing projects or programs, so that they're well positioned to succeed moving through the development phase. We assist project proponents primarily by providing direct access to analysts and officers just like me. We have a team of subject matter experts. Personally, I'm the CCUS lead, but we work across a variety of technology spaces. We act as a central point of contact within the Government of Canada for projects and lead companies working on large-scale industrial decarbonization projects. And we help them to coordinate and identify funding opportunities in partnership with key federal programs, including the Strategic Innovation Fund and Graham Allen's suite of programs within OERD. Overview of our work. We're currently tracking a number of projects across CCUS, hydrogen, energy storage, small modular nuclear reactors, and other technology spaces. We're supporting a number of CCUS projects across a variety of sectors listed here, including oil and gas, cement, steel, chemicals, and so on. CCUS remains a very important key decarbonization pathway for Canada's hardest to emit sectors. And there's a very keen understanding that high capital intensity requires federal investment in many cases. And so CCUS remains a priority area of the IDT. I will ask you if you see an alignment with your project or concept at early stage, in alignment with the objectives that I've outlined today. We'd be very interested to hear from you. I've included the email address here. We just ask that in your email address, please include a kind of a broad overview of your project or concept, including the name, the capital expenditure, anticipated funding needs from a federal perspective, existing partnerships on the project that are also seeking support, anticipated impacts on Canadian value chains. It's very important that we seek to target value chain decarbonization, which actually is quite large scale. And also the GHG emissions reductions associated with the project communicated in an annualized basis. This allows us to reach out back to you and have a very educated conversation as to how we can support your project and understand your business needs as it's positioned for federal support. I've kept it quick today. I hope we can get to Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll take, I think, we have a few minutes to our scheduled lunch, but I think we started a little bit late. So let's take a few questions and see how that goes. I'm gonna, I think, jump back to, oh, that's a self-reflective view. I was gonna jump back to this view in case the folks that had joined us online, Graham and Mary, wanted to chime in on some of the Q&A, and I'll read out some of the questions. So maybe the first one: how certain should businesses feel in terms of the current combination of carbon pricing and incentives remaining in order to make long-term decisions?
So I can start off with that one. So can people hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
From a policy perspective, I think the number one goal is to create a policy framework that enables the decisions to be made to get us to our end result in terms of emission reduction. So really, that's investment decisions, of course, and focusing. I think the question in terms of the CCUS and CCS and EOR is really focused on probably the bankability of those credits over time and in financing some of these projects. So I think there's a few considerations from a policy perspective before we start talking about potential funding programs or further supports. From a policy perspective, industrial carbon pricing in Alberta, as I've mentioned, has been around since 2007. It's durable. It's been relatively certain, even though that we've had some changes. I would say the support and the policy signal remained consistent. Maybe not in terms of the level, but in terms of the approach since 2007. So I think you can, as we think across political cycles and some of those associated risks, I think Alberta's system hasn't been in place for quite some time, has broad support from industry as well as government that I think we can be pretty certain that it'll remain into the future. On the value of credits, we put that schedule out there in terms of carbon price to 2030. That's a little step in the right direction in terms of committing. The other piece for us from a policy perspective is really managing the market as we move forward. We know that we need significant reductions to hit some of the goals that we're looking to achieve. We know that means from an industrial carbon pricing perspective that there's going to be significant projects coming online, emission reduction projects that are going to be introducing significant amounts of supply into the system. So from our perspective, as we look at the system in real time, we're ensuring that demand is there to be able to take up that supply. And again, not just that, but ensure that the credit value and the value of these investment decisions are maintained through time. So from a provincial perspective, that's what we're looking at. I understand the folks aren't here from a CFD perspective federally, but financial tools like that can have a part to play too in terms of increasing the certainty of the value that you're going to receive for these credits of your projects over time. So CFDs or price floors or other financial tools are definitely interesting. We understand the feds are moving forward with a piece, so we'll be very interested to see how that plays out, and then what's left after that in terms of the needed support. And our deputy mentioned a climate strategy, so I think one of the focuses of that climate strategy is really looking at some of these new innovative tools maybe that we need to unlock some of this activity moving forward.
Okay, go ahead. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. And thanks for acknowledging that, we don't have somebody here from finance who can address specific questions regarded to CCFDs and the Canada Growth Fund. I will say that if you're not aware of the technical backgrounder on the Canada Growth Fund, it is published. It was associated with the recent Fall Economic Statement 2022. It does have a little bit of high level detail as to the intentions behind CCFDs and the broader investment principles that will guide the Canada Growth Fund. I can say the government has heard concerns from industry around OPEX uncertainty. We've spoke at length today around specifically CapEx supports, which is where we see most of the activity from a federal support level. Although that is deepening. We have the Net Zero Accelerator, which Perry spoke to, and the ITC coming online, where Royal Cent will be needed in due time. I think that's where I'll stop. Thanks.
If I can
Yeah,
just
sure.
jump in
Please.
there. may not be speaking directly to the intent of the question, but from a SIF point of view, with the Strategic Innovation Fund, we look at every application that comes in through the lenses of both innovation and greenhouse gas reduction technologies and capabilities. So we look at that potential in every application that we look at. There are some sectors where obviously greenhouse gas reduction may not necessarily have such a major impact on the project itself. But that being said, that is not going away anytime soon. We will be looking at each project as they come in terms of what impact they can have on greenhouse gas emissions reduction.
Okay, great. We've got I would say describe it as a popular question here. If the best location for sequestration for Canadian emissions is across the border, i.e. Michigan Basin, would NRCan consider some transboundary arrangements? I don't know if that's
I think that one's probably for me.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we hear you well.
Awesome. Yeah, so we are not considering with our call supporting the development of storage sites outside of Canada, if that's kind of what the question's getting at. There is, well, no, honestly, I think if you read through the guide, you'll see that pretty much full stop, we're focusing on sites, development of sites in Canada.
Okay, and then I guess understanding that we're between everybody and lunch, maybe we'll call it a halt there.